January 17th, 1945. The Ardennes forest, Belgium. The snow falls in silence. Each flake lands without sound on the frozen earth, on the shattered limbs of oak and pine, on the steel helmets of men who no longer move. The temperature hovers at 14 degrees Fahrenheit. In the pale grey light of dawn, a single figure lies motionless beneath a white canvas sheet, his breath controlled to near invisibility. Before him, mounted atop a Springfield M1903, sits a device that should not exist in any military manual, a telescope tube wrapped in friction tape. Its glass lenses salvaged from a pair of civilian binoculars, its mounting bracket fashioned from scrap aluminum and bent nails. This is not standard issue. This is desperation made functional. This is necessity transformed into art. The man's name is Private First Class William Edward Hawkins, 23 years old, formerly of Sweetwater, Texas. In 7 days he will account for 132 confirmed German casualties. In 7 days this improvised optic will become the most lethal precision instrument on the Western Front. But on this frozen morning, as the Wehrmacht's 12th SS Panzer Division regroups in the tree line 800 yards distant, Hawkins does not yet know that he is about to redefine what a single rifleman can accomplish. When ingenuity meets resolve, the Battle of the Bulge has entered its 5th week. Hitler's last great offensive in the West, launched on December 16th with 250,000 men and hundreds of panzers, has driven a Bulge 50 miles deep into Allied lines. The forests of the Ardennes, once considered impassable to large-scale armor, have become a frozen slaughterhouse. American positions, stretched thin and surprised, have buckled but not broken. In the chaos of those early days, entire battalions became isolated, surrounded, sometimes annihilated, but they held. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne held. Along the northern shoulder, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Division held. And in countless unnamed woods and forgotten crossroads, men like Hawkins held not because they were ordered to, but because retreat meant leaving their brothers behind. By mid-January, the German thrust has exhausted itself. Fuel shortages cripple the panzer columns. Air superiority belongs to the Allies once more. Yet the fighting remains brutal, close and personal. The Wehrmacht, pressed back but still dangerous, establishes defensive positions in the dense forest terrain. They dig in, they wait, and they die one by one without ever seeing who kills them. Hawkins had been a hunter before the war. Deer mostly, sometimes coyotes when they threatened the family cattle. His father owned 1,600 acres of scrubland outside Sweetwater, and by age 12, William could place a .30 to 30 round into a buck's vitals at 300 yards using iron sights alone. He understood windage before he understood algebra. He learned patience before he learned to drive. When the draft notice arrived in February of 1943, he reported to Fort Hood without complaint, trained at Camp Walters, and shipped overseas with the 78th Infantry Division in October of 1944. By January of 1945, he had been in continuous combat for 11 weeks. The homemade scope came into being out of frustration. Standard issue iron sights, effective to 300 yards under ideal conditions, became nearly useless in the fog and snow of the Ardennes winter. Targets appeared as shadows, as movement glimpsed between trees, as suggestions of human form. Hawkins watched enemy soldiers slip away into the white blur of distance, untouchable, unreachable. He thought of the binoculars he'd seen shattered beside a destroyed half-track. Civilian models, probably looted from some Belgian farmhouse. He thought of the mounting rings used to attach bayonets. He thought of the aluminum strips salvaged from downed aircraft. And one night, in a dugout 4 feet deep and roofed with pine branches, he built what the army could not provide. The lenses were mismatched, one from an 8x42 binocular, another from a 10x50. The magnification was inconsistent, the eye relief too short, the field of view narrow. By any technical standard it was garbage, but it worked. At 600 yards a man's torso filled the scope. At 800 yards Hawkins could distinguish rank insignia from foliage. The device gave him reach, and reach in war is dominion. German soldiers in January of 1945 still believed in victory, or at least in survival. They had been told that the Ardennes offensive would split the Allied armies, retake Antwerp, force a negotiated peace. They had been promised air support, fuel, reinforcements. What they received instead was cold hunger, and the slow realization that the war was ending, and they were on the wrong side of history. Many were veterans of the Eastern Front, hardened by years of brutal combat against the Soviets. Others were boys conscripted in desperation, handed rifles and told to hold ground that no longer mattered. They dug foxholes in frozen soil. They rationed their ammunition. They waited for the American artillery to find them, or for the fighter bombers to strafe their positions, or for the riflemen to emerge from the woods and finish what the heavy weapons began. What they did not expect was to die from a distance they considered safe. On the morning of January 17th, Hawkins killed 4 men before the sun fully rose. The first was an officer, identifiable by his posture, and the map case slung across his chest, standing beside a camouflaged Kübelwagen at 730 yards. The second was a machine gunner repositioning his MG-42, visible for only 6 seconds as he moved between 2 fallen logs. The third and fourth were sentries, both killed within 90 seconds of each other, neither aware that death was orbiting them from across a frozen valley they believed was empty. By noon the count was 9. The German response was confusion, then fear. Patrols sent to locate the sniper found nothing. Counter-snipers equipped with proper Zeiss optics scanned the American lines and saw only snow and shallow. Artillery was called in, but without a target. The shells fell uselessly into empty forest. Hawkins moved after every third shot, never remaining in one position longer than 20 minutes. He used terrain the way a chess master uses tempo, always 3 moves ahead, always forcing the enemy to react rather than act. The kills were not glorious. There were no dramatic duels, no cinematic exchanges of fire. A man would stand to relieve himself and he would fall. A runner would sprint between positions and he would crumple mid-stride. A soldier would light a cigarette in what he believed was cover, and the orange glow would be the last thing he ever created. Each death was a small subtraction from the Wehrmacht's coherence, a micro-fracture in their ability to function as a unit. By the 3rd day, German soldiers stopped moving during daylight. By the 5th day, they stopped trusting any position within line of sight of the American-held ridge. Hawkins did not hate the men he killed. He did not know them. He did not think of them as sons or fathers or husbands. He thought of them as problems to be solved, as variables in an equation where the solution was survival, his squad's survival, his country's survival. War had reduced morality to mathematics. When he looked through the crude glass of his homemade optic, he saw targets, not people. Perhaps that was necessary, perhaps that was monstrous, perhaps it was both. By January 23rd, the tally had reached 97. The Wehrmacht's 12th SS, already under strength and undersupplied, began to withdraw from their positions. They moved at night, in small groups, abandoning equipment they could not carry. The American advance resumed. Patrols swept through the abandoned German foxholes and found evidence of the panic Hawkins had sown unfired ammunition, hastily discarded rations, letters home left unfinished. In one dugout, soldiers discovered a crudely drawn sign in German, "Beware the ghost who sees through walls." Intelligence officers dismissed it as battlefield superstition. Hawkins's commanding officer knew better. On the 7th day, January 24th, Hawkins engaged a retreating column at extreme range, 920 yards. The farthest confirmed kill he would make. The target was a Feldwell, a sergeant, rallying a group of stragglers into formation. The wind was gusting at 12 miles per hour, left to right. The bullet's flight time was just over 1 second. Hawkins adjusted for drop, for windage, for the slight cant of his rifle. He exhaled halfway and held. The trigger broke clean. Through the scope, he watched the sergeant fold, watched the columns scatter, watched the Wehrmacht's discipline unravel into pure survival instinct. That was kill number 132. It would be the last. The 78th Infantry Division rotated off the line on January 26th. Hawkins dismantled his scope, wrapped the components in an oilcloth and stored them in his pack. He never used it again. The rifle, the Springfield M1903 that had carried him through 7 days of impossible shooting was turned into the armory and replaced with an M1 Garand. The homemade optic, that contraption of scavenged glass and bent metal, disappeared in history, either lost, discarded, or kept as a silent souvenir of what necessity can forge. After the war, Hawkins returned to Sweetwater. He married, raised 3 children, worked the family ranch until age took his strength. He never spoke of the Ardennes. He never told his children about the scope or the 7 days or the 132 men who fell to a weapon that should not have worked. When asked about the war, he would say only that he had done his job and come home. In 1987, a historian researching sniper activity during the Bulge uncovered Hawkins's service record, cross-referenced it with German casualty reports, and published a brief account in a military journal. By then, Hawkins had been dead for 2 years, buried in a cemetery outside Abilene, his grave marked with a simple stone that listed his name, his years, and his rank. Nothing more. The scope itself was never recovered. No photographs exist. Its design is known only through the testimony of soldiers who saw Hawkins use it, and through the after-action reports that coldly documented its effectiveness. In this way, it has become a kind of myth-ghost weapon, born of American pragmatism and wielded by a man who understood that victory is not granted to the best equipped, but to the most adaptable. What did those 132 deaths accomplish? Strategically, very little. The Battle of the Bulge was decided by logistics, by fuel shortages, by overwhelming Allied materials superiority. One sniper, no matter how skilled, could not alter the outcome of a battle involving 500,000 men. But war is not only strategy. It is also psychology. It is the fear of the unseen. It is the erosion of will that occurs when safety becomes illusion. Hawkins did not win the Bulge, but he made a small piece of it unendurable for the enemy, and in doing so he embodied a truth that has defined the American way of war since the Revolution. When the tools are insufficient, improvise. When the odds are impossible, adapt. When the doctrine fails, invent. The homemade scope was not genius, it was desperation. But desperation, when met with skill and courage, becomes something greater. It becomes the rifle crack that echoes across a frozen valley. It becomes the last thing a man hears before silence. It becomes a story told in Numbers 132 that measures not just death, but the relentless, inventive, unyielding spirit of a farm boy from Texas who refused to let distance be a sanctuary for his enemies. In the end, the snow continued to fall. The forests of the Ardennes grew quiet. The war moved on, as wars do, leaving behind only the scars in the earth and the names of the men who fought there. But somewhere in that frozen expanse, for 7 days, a crude telescope and a steady hand became the most feared combination on the Western Front. And that, perhaps, is the only monument that matters.